Namaste. Mahabharata stands as one of the world's greatest epic. Mahabharata, apart from being an epic, is a history and more than that, a guide to the eternal human drama on earth. We will explore this today from a psychoanalytic standpoint with our consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, what do you believe? Mahabharata a mythology or Mahabharata a history?
Mahabharata history.
Okay.
Because the Hindu tradition is very clear about what is Itihas and what is Puran. And Itihas is very clear that Itihas, the way it is understood is that the writer says, so it happened. So about Mahabharata also, the writer says, so it happened. And therefore, there is no question about that being a mythological text. And crores of Indians over hundreds of years, not hundreds but thousands of years, have always believed that the Mahabharata is a part of this country's history, so is Ramayana. So definitely Mahabharata is a part of our history. And that makes it even more important. Because there are various ways to understand Mahabharata. And one of them is historical. It's also very important because as an epic, it does not have any parallel in terms of the complexity, in terms of the events, in terms of the scale of time, and most importantly, in terms of relevance to future human generations, including ours. It is an epic which is extremely relevant to the present as it was in the past. And that's how it has always been in India. The epic was told and retold over and over again. In each retelling, certain minor modifications came in, which distorts the real accuracy of the epic, but does not distort the relevance of the epic to our times, nor the core historical factuality of Mahabharata.
It sort of adapts, right? Instead
Yes.
of
Indians love mythology, so we mythologize everything.
yes.
Each generation, as it retells the story to the next or to itself, things are added, subtracted, modified, but the core kernel is not touched. And it is the core kernel which is always relevant, and what is added, subtracted, modified also comes from a space of relevance, and therefore the retelling keeps the epic perpetually contemporary.
Right. So, sir, is psychoanalytic approach of understanding Mahabharata a right approach?
It is one of the many approaches, though I would say it's an inadequate approach, not a right approach, but I would not dismiss to say it is a wrong approach and should not be used. It definitely can be used, and it has a lot to offer to us when it is used, and therefore should be used. There is a sociological approach to understanding of Mahabharata. There is a political approach to understanding of Mahabharata. There is a psychological approach to the understanding of Mahabharata, and there is a spiritual approach to understanding of Mahabharata. Obviously, all these approaches are partial, no approach is complete, and if you put them together, harvest is much better than otherwise. So psychoanalysis is not adequate to understand the whole of Mahabharata, but is a precious and valuable approach to the understanding of Mahabharata. Few people have tried it. I think we should try it, and there is a treasure to be hunted out if we apply psychoanalysis to Mahabharata. Uh, okay, let's stop at that, and I'll go into the nuances later on.
Okay. So, sir, how can one profitably use psychoanalysis to understand Mahabharata in a better way?
So when we talk about human beings and human events, uh, every human mind has three parts: the abnormal part, the normal part, and the supernormal part. And psychoanalysis is very good in analyzing the subnormal part of the human psyche, the hidden, mysterious part of the human psyche, the unconscious. So when we look at all the characters in the Mahabharata, each of them has an unconscious mind, and psychoanalysis can be profitably used to understand the unconscious mind of each. And that enables us to understand characters. So the first place where psychoanalysis can be used to understand Mahabharata is to understand the characters by understanding their unconscious. Second, understand the events which these characters bring into action. Because some of the, not all the motivations, but some of the motivations to do or not do come from the unconscious, where psychoanalysis helps us. Third is how these characters were shaped, how their unconscious mind came to get structured, to get uh, manufactured, so to say. And there we come to events in their lives. What were the shaping events in the lives of each of the characters? And we realize each character in the Mahabharata is an extremely complex character with inconsistencies, contradictions, and very deep layered operating of the psyche. That is what creates Mahabharata with so many characters, each of them so rich and complex, and so many events, with each event having implications far and wide, which creates a playground for psychoanalysis as complex as a case can get.
So, what makes Mahabharata so interesting that we apply psychoanalysis to it?
It has everything that we would be looking for from standpoint of knowledge, interest, and taste. Each character is a rich, complex, complicated character. Each character is so different from everyone else. And there are groups of characters of different generations. There are no clear whites and blacks except for very few people. And there are moral dilemmas on the way, all the way. It reflects very closely our real life, even today. It is not a complete black and white drama that you see in theaters. It actually mimics real life of complicated issues of the brain. Secondly, from a psychoanalytic standpoint, everything is there. The ego, the superego, all in full florid play. So from Yudhishthir, who is a very superego person, to Dushashan, who is a very id person, and everyone in between. All the characters are there. Yes. Not to mention the avatar of Sri Krishna himself, whom the Indian tradition calls the perfect person. Extremely complicated and extremely rich in constitution and action. So this is one aspect. And the second aspect is related to our real life struggles and events which are close to what happened in Mahabharata in the generic sense, not in the specific sense. So wars are fought even today. They were using horses, we may be using missiles, but essentially wars still continue. There was a struggle for the throne. Even today there is struggle for power. So from kingdom to democracy, but the struggle for power is still there. So the generic constants of human existence and human collectivity, they are still the same. So the specifics change, the generic are yet to change. And that creates the relevance of this topic, and therefore the meaningfulness and the invitation to go deeper into it with all tools possible. One of the tools being psychoanalysis, to understand more of it so we get more profit out of that understanding for our present and future.
Can you take up some of these poignant moments or characters for analysis then?
Yeah. If we take up the very moving, very poignant, very rich and very inviting characters, we can start with Bhishma Pitama. We can go to Dhritarashtra. We can go to Duryodhan. We can go to the Pandavas, Sri Krishna. And very importantly, not to miss Shakuni. And also Dronacharya and Ashwatthama. So these are, and Draupadi of course. So these are very, very interesting, moving, poignant, very complicated, very complex characters. They are not simple characters. They are not white and black heroes of a novel. It's not fiction. And we see in their lives, it is not a life only of victory or only of defeat. Everything is there. At times they become victorious, at times they are belittled and they are humbled. At times they are clear, at times they are confused. At times they are blinded by their desires. At times they act like noble saints who are masters of desires, but actually they are not masters. And you see the whole complexity of it. And we also see very important events in that epic. The first event is of Ganga leaving Bhishma. And that's very important from psychoanalytic standpoint, the loss of the mother. Because if we don't look at it mythologically, that the river became a woman, or the woman would dissolve into a river and again come back. Probably that might be a mythologized version of a real woman who was very pure, maybe even a sage, who would be going off to do her tapasya on and off, and Bhishma would experience that loss of the mother on and off. And that's a very important element in the way mind of Bhishma himself was created. So for analyzing the character of Bhishma, the loss of mother in early childhood, repeated loss and repeated gain, is a very important element. The second is Bhishma's taking of Bhishma Pratigya, where he sacrifices all of his happiness for the sake of his father. That's a very important event in that epic. Then we have many other events. The event of Lakshagra, the event of the Swayamvar, a very important event of hijacking of the three princesses by Bhishma. Then the game of dice and Draupadi's dishonoring. And then we have a very important, the whole important aspect of the war in Kurukshetra, and in the middle of it, a very important, the most important event of Bhagavad Gita. And then we have a very important element towards the end, the event of Ashwatthama. Not to mention the killing of each of the major warriors, but towards the end, the event of Ashwatthama, that's a very important event. And the last event of all the Pandavas going out in search of liberation, and only Yudhishthir making it to heaven. So these are very, very important events, so important that in fact you can go in depth of each of these events for an hour or maybe even for a full day to discuss and have a discourse on the poignancy and the content and the implications of each of these events. So each of these events and each of these characters is actually a treasure for anybody who wants to go deeper, and equally so for anyone who wants to apply psychoanalysis to Mahabharata. In fact, we can have a full series of application of psychoanalysis to Mahabharata, one episode for each character, one episode for each event. But today we are discussing in general, so we keep to that.
So does pathology and healing make an appearance in Mahabharata?
Pathology makes an appearance quite often. Healing makes an appearance very rarely. So we see pathology in all the characters by and large. Very few characters appear as healthy. And some of the healthiest that we see are Krishna, Vidur, and to some extent Yudhishthira. But Yudhishthira is not without his own flaws. There is a pathology inside, but that is limited, circumscribed. In other characters, we see rampant outcomes of pathology. So that happens, but when it comes to healing, we see three very important elements of healing. One very important element of healing is in Bhagavad Gita, where Arjun, because of his understanding and almost a kind of a very deep knowledge given by Krishna, is able to heal himself of many of his problems that were inside of him. And because the Gita talks about problem in a Arjun's problem in a macro way, doesn't go into the constitutional analysis of it. If we go into it with psychoanalysis, we can look at it in a different way. The second element is of Yudhishthira. Over a period of time, he undergoes self-reflection and self-change. And towards the end, he is able to be one of the very few, or rather the only one among the five, to really go to the gates of heaven. And by that, what we mean is not heaven in the Brahmanical sense, but towards mukti and freedom and liberation, or nirvana in the Indian sense. This translation is very difficult. Gates of heaven, it means very different things in the Indian context than what it means in the Brahmanical context. And third very important element is of the healing of Draupadi, because the revenge is done. So that also is a very important healing which happens by revenge being accomplished. It may not appear to be noble from a moral standpoint, but it's very effective from a practical standpoint. And maybe equally important from an ethical standpoint if one believes in that set of ethics. So these are some of the instances of healing, but a very important element of pathology is that practically everybody is hurt in some way or the other. Nobody is free from hurt. And one very important element that we cannot miss, but we often do, is the mind of Shakuni. How hurt he was that he left everything he had in Gandhar and came to live over here to seek revenge. So his humiliation, which was unbearable to him, the pain of his sisters, which was unbearable to him, which was unbearable to him. and the kind of pain and revenge it generates, which ultimately leads to the whole destruction and war. That also is a very important aspect, the suffering of Shakuni, which we don't go into usually. We think in terms of black and white and just cast him as a villain, but we don't go into the making of the villain, the suffering of Shakuni. That also is a very important element. And last is about Ashwathama, how he is condemned to a suffering forever, which is very unique in Indian discourse, because unlike in case of Sisyphus, we don't have parallels of suffering forever. We always have a resolution of something. The core line is that you can only have errors, not a sin. And every error can be corrected by proper work and penance and atonement. So there's nothing like a beyond atonement error. But here we see some shades of it. Towards the end of it, he is also shown some way of partial atonement. So he's not condemned like Sisyphus. His condition is better than Sisyphus. A more rounded situation comes about. It is not the split open as in case of Sisyphus, that you condemn somebody forever. So it is still a more rounded, more balanced approach, but still nearest to it that happens in the Indian discourse in tradition is what we see in Ashwathama. These are, I think, very important characters and events that one can go into deeply speaking in many ways, including using psychoanalysis.
Sir, one of the central treasures of Mahabharata is Bhagavad Gita. So is there any point of connect that it has with psychoanalysis? I mean, Bhagavad Gita?
Yes and no. When we look at the human psyche, we see the three parts: the subnormal, the normal, and the supernormal. Psychoanalysis is very good in the subnormal. But when it stretches into the normal or the supernormal, it gets into difficulties. Bhagavad Gita essentially goes into the supernormal, and to some extent in the normal, very little in the subnormal. So in the subnormal, there can be a point of connect. When the Bhagavad Gita talks about the mind or how things happen, and below the awareness levels, at that point there is a connect. But when you talk about something existential, mystical, or spiritual, then psychoanalysis becomes an inadequate tool to really be applied to something like Bhagavad Gita, because it talks about states of minds which are outside of the scope of psychoanalysis at present. Take, for example, the central idea, the central treasure of Bhagavad Gita in terms of the Sthita Prajna. Now, that is a description of a state where there is no thought. There is awareness, no thought, and bliss. Now, this is the goal of many spiritual traditions. And Bhagavad Gita also places a lot of importance on attainment of this state. And you cannot attain this state unless you have really mastered your desires and fears. But psychoanalysis cannot even conceive or accept the possibility that such a state is possible. So the limits of human potential are different between the two, between psychoanalysis and between Bhagavad Gita. And therefore, there are many areas which are beyond the scope of psychoanalysis, and a few areas where there is a point of connect. I would rather say the other way. If psychoanalysis opens up itself and accepts that part of knowledge which is at present out of its scope and expands itself, and then uses its core theory in that expanded area, after that is done, it will become a more relevant tool to be applied to Bhagavad Gita.
Okay, right. Sir, in philosophical and ethical terms, then, how does Mahabharata appear today?
In philosophical terms, it still is as fresh as it was. And
Is it?
still, yeah, and we can still look at the same themes of destiny and free will, of what is right and what is wrong, of what is spiritual ideal and what is a practical ideal, of absolute ethics versus contextual ethics, of goal-based ethics versus principle-based ethics. We can still look at it in the same way and it can still be as fresh. But when it comes to ethics, the specifics of it, many things have changed. For example, the ethic of being loyal to the king or the king having the right to rule, all those things have undergone a change. The world is no longer the same. Fighting a war in a desired battlefield, a designated battlefield. Today wars are chaotic, they are spread all over in an amorphous way. We are no longer in that era of conventional wars. So all those things, when it comes to specifics, the ethical part and the specific part, there we lead a lot of customization to be and rethinking to be applied in the practical context today, contemporary context. When it comes to the core spiritual and philosophical aspect of it, it still remains as relevant, as fresh, as contemporary as it was.
So it was really nice discussing Mahabharat from a psychoanalytic standpoint. Let's hope we can continue this, further, this series further as we discussed,
Sure, sure.
picking up each character and incidents and dive deep into psychoanalysis of the story. Well, you can write to us at hvindia@gmail.com, and we wait for your reviews and your opinions. Thank you. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.